Okay, thank you very much for returning promptly from coffee. It's greatly appreciated. It makes my job as your moderator a little easier. Sometimes it's like herding cats to get everybody back and get the momentum back in this room, especially when we're enjoying the networking and the coffee outside. There'll be more time for that later, I promise you, with the cocktail reception. And one final reminder about the drawing. If you haven't already done so, please put your business card in the bowl out by the registration desk. There will be a nice gift awarded to the lucky winner, and the drawing will be at the close of the event this afternoon prior to going to the cocktail reception. So, before we get engaged with the panel, I would like to ask all of you to indulge me in asking a question of you. And if any of you are willing to be the first brave soul that raises their hand and is willing to respond and expose yourself in this lovely group of your colleagues, I would ask you to please do it. Because I've been doing this for a long time. I've been representing this industry into the regulatory world, coming back with that regulatory message to this industry, working as a liaison between equipment manufacturers and ship owners that need the equipment. It's a long history, and I've seen all sides of this in my 30 years in this world. So I'm looking at this discussion area that we're talking about today and this transformation that we're all dealing with. And the way that I see it, there are three fundamental forces at work here. One is internal to your company. You have certain potential stewardship programs of your own environmental or ESG programs that are part of how your company is organized, and which imposes certain requirements on the way you do business and the way that you look at this evolution, and when you make moves to invest in technology, and when you look at energy efficiency and take those steps forward rather than waiting. So one of the drivers comes from internal. The two external drivers are regulatory imposition, which holds an eventual gun to your head, and when the gun's at your head, you start to pay attention, and then you ask, well, how long is it going to take before you pull the trigger? And sometimes that is the next motivator. It comes from the regulatory side. The third are market forces. When the market starts to demand that we make those changes. And it's one of the things that I referred to earlier about the way we do business and the way that we write charter contracts and what have you. And up until this point, there has been the beginning of a movement where the charter parties are saying, look, I'm going to require you to have a certain sustainability profile or you can't carry my goods to market anymore. That unfortunately isn't typically associated with preferred rates. And that's a missing piece of all of this. But I think that's the third driver here, our market forces. And I'd like to ask for some of you, if you would please, to comment on which of those forces you think has the most influence on the way you're looking at your sustainability goals and your methodology to consider how you're going to move forward with your fleets, with technology and what have you, to be part of this movement. So there are three options, and I'd like some of you to give an opinion, and a microphone will come to your table so you can offer that opinion of which of those three forces you think is the most dynamic force at this point in time on your business. Any hands? Come on, that's why we're here. We're here to have a discussion. Please, let's begin this discussion with this topic.
I think that's easy. It's the regulatory. Because if you don't have certificates, you cannot trade. You cannot move the vessel.
So that's true to an extent, okay? The regulatory process, right, is, we make rules, right? And we're subject to those rules. But the rules don't mean much without enforcement. And, we had the Trident Alliance amongst a large group of ship owners when the sulfur cap was introduced, because they wanted enforcement. And so they proposed to the regulatory community how to enforce the sulfur cap so that we weren't disadvantaged. Those of us who were taking on low sulfur fuel were then suddenly disadvantaged if we were bidding for work against somebody who was not using low sulfur fuel. So it has a lot to do, not just with the regulation, but also with the eventuality of enforcement. So is there anybody else willing to make a comment on this?
Thank you. I also agree that for the owners, the driving force is the regulatory framework. And I understand fully the concept of the ESGs and the sustainability and all these things, which are very, very important for the next generation. But the ship owners are putting their money in order to continue operate and make a profit. So given this question of yours, I would like to ask Mia. She had an excellent presentation. Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask you, do you have any idea what would be the cost for the passenger tickets on this new ferry in 2027 compared with today's prices? For this highly sophisticated, very, very expensive, I suppose, ship? Can you guess, if you don't have the answer, I suppose, I don't know if it's clear, or if this vessel is subsidized or supported by any fund or something, but do you have any idea what would be the cost for the single passenger seat?
Yeah, okay, you mean this Estonian transport ferry. So of course that is like governmental project. So I believe some subsidies most likely are going to be in place. But I think in any ship you can think about, well, I don't know what, hydrogen is like some 6,000 euro or something.
My point is that for the all these technologies are fantastic. Not all of them have been proven yet in our industry, at least. But for the first comers, for the first movers, let's say, there should certainly need to be an incentive in order to invest this money instead of investing this money to the stock market or to somebody else or to something totally different from shipping. So this is my point. I think the regulatory framework should be guiding the ship owners in their future decisions, because ship owners are followers of the technology. We are not inventing the technology, and at this stage, at least, in my understanding, deciding to go ahead with a new technology, and of course I don't mean energy-saving devices, I'm talking about future fuels, alternative fuels, carbon capture, expensive projects and all this stuff. If there is no incentive for the ship owner, for someone to back up his decision, that may not be proven to be correct at the end of the day. The market will, and the industry, of course, will evolve at a very slow pace. And we don't have this time. So I think the regulators should take this into serious consideration. We need the first movers. We need companies that will get this incentive and support, financial support, to go ahead and try these different technologies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think that's a good segue into the topics that we have for our panel. So thank you for your comments. The panel, as you can see, is based on the discussion of the transformation of today's fleet. We have three panelists in front of you. Soren Wandi from Frese, Renee B. Christensen from Green Instruments, and Tormund Vik from Howden. And we saw their presentation, so you have some idea, if you weren't already familiar with them, what their companies represent and how they go about their business. There are 4 basic areas that we want to try to touch on during this part of the discussion. One is energy efficiency. The second is the economic effects, the CAPEX, OPEX, and ROI. The third is the performance, maintenance, and data logging. And the last is the SEEMP program for ships energy efficiency management plans and what the impacts are for that particular aspect of record keeping and reporting. So I think I'd like to throw first a question out to the floor before I ask something of the panel, and perhaps that will lead to a response from one of our capable expert panelists. So there are some obvious energy efficiency measures that can be taken. Let's say the first bite out of the apple. That, slow steaming, whether that be automation, valve control, what have you, to have a first step to get a certain percentage of energy efficiency. Those first steps are usually kind of counterintuitive. It gets harder as we go. The first 20 or 30%, you can see a path towards that. The incremental 3%, 5%, 3%, 5% after that becomes more difficult. So I'd like to ask again for some comments from you. If you can give us some insights on what energy efficiency measures you've taken up to this point. If you feel that you've achieved the reduction targets that you were looking for from those initial measures, and if there are some next steps into those incremental 3 and 5% that you can foresee what they might be. Is there anybody that would be willing to comment on that from your perspective of what actual measures you've undertaken and the results that you've seen from that? Okay.
Well, we have tried on 2 Kamsarmax bulk carriers to apply silicon-based anti-fouling. But the problem with assessing their effectiveness is the quality of the data, which is questionable. So I have myself verified some energy reduction in terms of speed. We get a half a knot more for about 300 or 400 kilowatts less, which is substantial. But that may not be enough, because the right ship, which is leading charterers association for the bulk carriers, are tightening the knots even more, and even this, which represents a substantial investment from our behalf, is not enough, and we have to go more. All in all, they force us to renew the older vessels, replace them. But there is only so much you can do on an old vessel, on an older vessel, let's say. They're not old, it's not even 15 years old, about 12 years old. Yeah, so we are now thinking of other means to reduce, but not as radical as a lubrication system, for example. We are thinking of those for new buildings, because as a retrofit, please correct me if I'm wrong, is too complicated and requires engineering from the start. You need one diesel generator dedicated for this. So we are not looking this direction, at least not yet. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you. So I'll ask our panel now if you'd like to respond to that, either from the standpoint of air lubrication, since it was mentioned, or if you believe that your efforts can solve some of those problems with older vessels and what you're bringing to the table, because they are a challenge, and the older the vessel, the more of a challenge. And this is going to play into the whole CII discussion, which we're going to get into in a few minutes. So, Torben, would you like to comment?
Yeah, my first comment would be that again, older vessels, how old are we looking at? So when we are looking at vessels, we are looking at vessels which are younger than 10 years. Because, as you are right, then older than 10 years, is it worthwhile even looking into vessel efficiency? And again, another thing which is also important is that the parts which are installed needs to be simple and easy to operate. So that's those things we're also looking for. Yeah, that's my comment on that one.
Yeah.
I'll add, I'm not an expert in air lubrication system, but in general around the energy efficiency means, I think that the approach, that the way we kind of look at it and the lens that we see through is that for many years, for 15 years, we've been doing energy efficient measures on land. So we've proven technology works and a lot of expertise in it. And I think my being, there is actually a lot of activity on the energy efficiency side going have been going on for many years outside of the maritime industry in different industrials. And there is, I've really only been in the maritime industry for 5 years. Before that, I was working 15 years in the energy and power industry, where the whole thing sulfur cap, well, all the power plants around the world started being retrofitted in the early 80s. And my point is that there's actually a lot of existing proven technology that has already been cost optimized on land for sometimes 2 decades. So some of the stuff that we are offering in terms of smart controls and some of the stuff you've seen out there can actually be retrofitted on vessels that are older. But I will say and be honest around, when you look at really old vessels, you run into all sorts of issues that the pumps you may have is of a quality, or there's so much wear and tear that even though we fit our equipment, some of the existing equipment is simply not good enough, is in a state where, and then all of a sudden a business case ends up in being not so good, because then a lot of the existing equipment needs to be replaced. So you have a point for sure.
So I'd like to invite other comments of your experience internally with your efforts towards energy efficiency measures, what you may have undertaken, what you see as your next step, and continue with this conversation before we move on to the point you raised about data and the veracity of data, especially when it comes to CII reporting.
Thank you. There is a full spectrum of technologies, energy-saving devices with very nice marketing tools behind them. In our company, we are using, basically, not tried. We have using a lot of them. Name it ducts for the propellers, fins for the propeller cone, top-tier anti-foulings, scrubbers, you name it, energy VFDs for the fans, for the pumps. The issue is that you cannot precisely measure the saving of these devices. And believe me, in our company, I feel that we are in a very good level of digitalization. We have full telemetry from the vessel, high frequency data, and still we cannot measure the actual benefit. What this implies for a ship owner who intends to invest, when you don't have a clear and precise ROI, or even the payback period in simple words, you cannot be very sure that this investment is worth taking. So the question to the panel is how you can guarantee and what are the steps that your companies are taking to guarantee the savings that you promise in your presentations, in your excellent material that you offer to the clients, how you can precisely guarantee the saving and the payback periods of your technologies?
I would like to comment on that. At Green Instrument, we are not supplying energy efficiency tools, but we can measure your efficiency. We can measure what's coming out of the funnel of CO2. What I say is more reliable with a direct measurement what's coming out, so you have the data available day by day in front of you. I fully agree with you, what you say earlier, that is also related to the legislation. How can we support those who invest in green technologies? How can we support those who are willing to do more investment for a greener future? And how can we have improve this lack of transparency? Those who are not willing to do this measurement, especially focus on the flag stage, how will they handle CII if you're not fulfilling your improvement every 2 years? That is, of course, a big question for the authorities. But I say we can document, and my tag into this is also that I hope by future we end up in a way where we have to pay for the amount of CO2. That's the easiest way, instead of calculation models with a lot of different factors, maybe not determined for your specific type of vessel, but if it's CO2 tax or CO2 trading systems, from my point of view, is the way to go.
So how can we verify and guarantee that what we say is actually achievable? I think that there's kind of two ways to look at it. One way is that there is physical tools, and Rene has some of them, so what we do with some of our clients is that we actually put equipment on board to measure, and the vessel will operate for a month or 2 months, and then we log all that data. So we do it before and an after comparison. But also we found that was a key, because you're right, there's been, for years now, a lot of VFDs have been installed in pumps, but there's actually not been any measurement of they're actually giving you what you say. So when we developed our solution, a key input into that was we have to provide the daily kilowatt savings in our instrumentation, so our customers can see 24/7 what are the kilowatts consumed in any kind of given different operations that, whether you're in port or whether you're out maneuvering. So that's part of the package. And I think the interesting thing is that with a lot of these energy-saving devices, not just what Frese is doing, is that there's been small pockets of things that's been done. And I think it's only now where people start to put a lot of parts together, and you get the benefits of all the sum of all the parts. Because our valves, and we are traditionally a valve company, the valves themselves are not going to give you any guarantee or anything unless you start building the automation on top and the VFDs, and you then need to get all those individual components to actually talk to each other to give what you are asking. So that's one thing. The other lens is that we are now working with the classification societies, because I think we all have an interest in getting some standards around how do we verify this? How can we actually look the ship owners in the eyes and say, well, okay, maybe, it can only be plus minus 1% wrong, and how do we go about that? So I think we need some standards here as well, and we are now in conversation with classification societies to try and start addressing this, and I think you will see that a lot more to try and push what is actually the best available technologies. And only by putting some standards up, how do you benchmark these things against each other?
Just a short comment on it also. I've been in the marine business for 30 years, and I have been retrofitting a lot of other stuff for other companies. And I have seen a lot of sales pitch from companies which are promising 1-2% and propeller things, and I have not seen anybody who could measure 2%. So, as Søren says, if we go out and promise something, regardless of it's Frese or Howden or whoever, there should be some standards for it and a way of measuring it. And there's a lot of companies like Green Instruments or whoever who can actually do it for us. But it's not a demand in the market. Right now it's a little bit like a lot of people are running around trying to collect 1-2% here and there. But does it work? Well, we don't know.
I just have one comment. I think also it's a golden opportunity for the marine business to be a little bit more ambitious. Instead of saying, yeah, what is the minimum level we can achieve? We have to make money, yes, but sometimes we also have to raise a little bit higher and say, okay, we have to do some investment. Can we continue like this? Continue to see when you are in international water that is a garbage bin for all the things we have on board. That's my question towards you.
So I think there's another aspect of this too, because at the moment, without standards, we're just modeling and trying to come up with some assumptions about savings. But we're also doing that in a vacuum, right? We look at that one element as like a fraction and look at it like it exists by itself. Nothing exists by itself in a ship's operation. If you're claiming that you're, by doing any particular cost save or energy savings measure, you're not calculating in the environmental conditions, the sea state, wind states, and what have you, in that particular voyage that you're doing the assessment. You don't know whether it's plus or minus the 2% that you think you gained. And it's the other challenge that we're facing here in trying to capture the variables and look at this as integrated processes rather than standalone processes, which in and of themselves you might be able to model fairly accurately, but you might lose that precision when you start to look at the interaction of that particular aspect of the operation with another aspect. And fortunately, there's a lot of digital platforms being developed with route optimization and wind historical information that's able to fit into the modeling that we're doing and hopefully start to get that more integrated model and give us more precision over time, but yet to be seen. But excellent point. So we've had two people that have been willing, amongst all of you fantastic delegates today. Is there anybody else that would like to comment or ask a panel while we're still on this particular part of the topic?
I have a quick comment.
Yep.
I know I'm cheating, I'll be in a panel a little bit later, but this comment is more into the energy efficiency. I'm part of a steering committee in the International Standard Organization, ISO, where we are currently working on a new maritime ISO standard for energy efficiency. So this is coming out by the end of next year. And the idea with this standard is exactly what we're talking about here, to benchmark systems and products against each other, both in design phase but also in the retrofit scenario. So you're able to actually have a standardized way of measuring and benchmarking systems. So it is an ISO standard that's coming up, and I think will be of great help, and especially in this discussion here, it will actually even the playing field between systems. So that was a quick comment. Thank you.
Excellent comment. Thank you. I have been remiss, and I was just reminded that I have been remiss. I know a lot of people are really hesitant to raise their hand and speak in an environment like this. On your table are some little barcodes. Those barcodes, if you take your phone and turn on your photos and scan that barcode, it will take you to a link called Slido. And Slido is a platform that we can use here where you can submit questions anonymously, or you can identify yourself if you prefer. And it takes that waving your hand and taking the microphone out of the equation if you're uncomfortable with that, but you still want to participate in this discussion and either contribute with your comments or challenge what's being said by the panel, myself, or anybody else. I really want to encourage that interaction. And if you're hesitant to do it publicly, then please take a quick snapshot of the Slido barcode and take advantage of that mechanism in order to engage in the conversation discreetly, if you like. Okay. I'm going to kind of move this because there was another point raised about the veracity of the data. And we're in a very odd time because we're employing all of these mechanisms, digital platforms, instruments, and what have you, and they're informing us, right, of certain things that they're designed to tell us. And maybe they're not perfect, maybe they don't take into account some other forces and other aspects of things that are going on around them, but they inform us. There's a very different dynamic of being informed by data and having that data be the basis for a regulatory action or a reporting action, i.e. CII, right? So it's a data-driven platform, reporting to CII. And unless we have some ability to understand the significance outside of just information for our own purposes of managing our ships and managing our fleets and trying to achieve our own energy efficiency goals, when it moves over into the regulatory arena, there's a very, very different dynamic when it comes to precision of data. So the comment was already made about questioning the data. So we'll get to that comment, that question in a second, but I would like to anybody else in the room, either via Slido or this, on this specific topic, this data that is being provided to you now informationally, but eventually to go there, how confident are you in that data? And do you think we know enough now for it to be used as a regulatory tool, or are we still in the information phase? I think we know your answer. Is there anybody else that would like to comment on this?
Hello, I'm Kordos Konstantinos. I'm energy efficiency engineer of Neptune Lines. It's a company managing and operating vehicle carriers. With data management, we consider ourselves very advanced. We have telemetry in most of our vessels. The problem is that in order to achieve the accuracy that you mentioned, we have found out that it can be achieved, and the accuracy of measuring the 1% is achievable, but it proved to be much more expensive than we initially thought. The problem is that the sensors are very delicate, let's say. They need maintenance. They need a significant CAPEX to install. And the problem is that you must have some, let's say, dedicated person to monitor completely the sensors. So it becomes an extra, let's say, function of the company that should be focused just on this. If you do all this, which, as I said, it proved to be more expensive than initially thought, then you can have the accuracy you want. In reality, we don't do in all vessels because of the cost. We do only in modern vessels, which is easier, and let's say we have we are more motivated to have the accuracy there because we invest all the new technologies and we want to monitor them better. In case you have all the sensors installed, for example, for systems like, let's say, the VFDs, we have kilowatt-hour meters installed in all generators. All this is adding cost. Torque meters are adding cost, flow meters are adding costs, and they have to be maintained. If you maintain in very high level, you can achieve the accuracy you want. It's not what we have found also is that we cannot eliminate manual reporting. This will never happen. But it's something that telemetry becomes something, and digital data becomes something that gives you a very good assistance and very good accuracy to have a proper calculation for a new technology and see if and make some theoretical at the beginning calculations, and if you install afterwards, you do also post benefit, let's say, calculations. Even for small technologies, for technologies promising small benefits.
Thank you, and I think that blends itself into some other discussions we've had in the past, and we're going on at the IMO meeting at PPR recently about calibration and coming up with standards for calibration of sensors. Because if we are going to depend on that information and those signals, and there are calibration and maintenance requirements, they need to be taken into account in order to make sure that we're getting as accurate and precise a data as possible. Before I move to this question, would any of you care to comment on this issue about data precision?
I would like to put a comment. Nothing comes for free. That's true. And by the end of the day, it will be the consumer who has to pay for a greener agenda. But we also have to make a decision: will we continue as now, or will we accept it has a cost? That's something we have to decide. From my point of view, we cannot continue as today. And of course, it has a cost. Even for there has been quite a revolution since I was sailing for 25 years ago. At that time, we had to maintenance things. You still need to do maintenance on your things. It's not been that clever. So of course, it comes with a cost. We cannot reject that. So it is needed to document what we have. I think we will see more and more data-driven data. You say manual reporting is still needed. We can see a huge development here in data-driven technologies coming into the marine business. So definitely by time you will get more and more support this way.
Thank you. So, you know, when we're trying to foresee how this is going to work and how these discussions are going to evolve, you know, we put together the program, we come up with a structure, we have talking points, we put them in order, we have panels and certain things. But once you get into this discussion, it's really impossible to hold a discussion about one of these topics without it automatically kind of blending into other topics. So, by definition, we have a later discussion about life cycle assessments. But I think it's important in the context of the discussion we're having now that we talk about it now as well as later. So we have a question posed to the three of you. I don't know if you, I guess you can see it in front of you. You don't have to look around. So looking at this question, from the ship owner's side, what's the value to invest in a life cycle assessment profile for a vessel? Do any of the three of you participate in the way that you offer your services or equipment to contribute to the life cycle assessment? And if so, what's the value proposition?
I mean, the honest answer is no, we're not going all in, and I'm sure it will come very soon. But what we are doing, particularly with naval architects and some of the ship owners, is that back to also the ship efficiency, energy efficiency management plans, is that we contribute with the knowledge we have. And I think the life cycle assessment, in my view, in my humble perception, is a puzzle with a lot of pieces that needs to be put together to get a true view. And it's something that certainly in Denmark, we've seen some naval architects going into. And I think we even have Rasmus here for Reflow, who is big into the life cycle assessment. So that's certainly a question for him. But are we where we would like to be with that? No. But are we contributing as much as we can? Yes, we certainly are.
Mia, would you care to comment on this about the value proposition? I mean, obviously from a standpoint of design and construction and all the talking points that you touched on earlier, would you like to see if you can respond to this question, please?
Yeah, why not? I mean, of course, let's say the life cycle assessment, this is kind of the new area. Like actually, we have also been just kind of starting with that from the design point of view, that we actually have hired a person to perform this kind of assessment within Delta Marine. But of course then, well, have to think about that. Now the big issue actually, of course, focuses in these fuels and in those life cycle, let's say, factors of the fuels. So to me, at least, in this moment, it more like brings some kind of insight that where is kind of, yeah, how to say that. We know, actually, I have been performing this kind of development project already like over 10 years ago, where we actually did this kind of life cycle assessment of a RoPax vessel, and there it became very evident that it's I think 90% is in the operation phase, of course, and it's the emissions of the ship, and therefore all the energy efficiency, and that is important. But now when we are actually moving towards that, we will be having these green fuels that at least calculation-wise will have, and I mean, however you verify and calculate, they will have this lower life cycle impact. So that means that we are pushing kind of the impact more towards the building and actually end of life. So to me, it's like I cannot say actually how can you make money with this information right now, but it is kind of an important insight. So then you can understand basically that if you want to kind of even further increase or decrease maybe the impacts, so kind of where is then the next big beef, which are kind of the processes. So yeah, it's yeah, this is like a just thought.
So before we leave the CII subject, we're talking about data here again, and there's a big controversy that I've been exposed to in this discussion about data, about ownership of the data. Because there are some platforms that are coming in that consider the data proprietary, and they want to own the data, and they'll inform you, but they own the data. There are other circumstances where ship owners say, look, I'm buying this from you, whether it be the information or whether it be the devices that are providing this data to me. It's my data. And that then kind of, in that controversy, the question comes up also is what other uses are for the data? And if there are uses outside of your control because you don't own the data, can that come back at some point and potentially haunt you because your data is now available to someone to be used in a manner which you didn't intend for it to be used, and the safety and the security concerns that go along with all of that. So is there anybody that would like to comment on this idea of ownership of data and what your opinion on that is, and especially when it comes to risk factors? Andreas, thank you.
It's a chicken and the egg situation here. Because the data belongs to the owner who creates the data. The problem is the data goes to a platform. The platform creates certain analytics, which they belong to the user who gave the data. The accumulation of data being aggregated and anonymously redefined has no owner. And therefore, that's the legal issue you discuss it within the European Union and the United States. Now, in other obscure environments, it might be different, but in the environment that we're talking here, the European Union, the data belongs to the owner or the operator actually providing. The risk of security for me is not high, and I'm not talking from the Clean Shipping Alliance hat, but I'm talking from my other hat. Is not high. It's how you arrange the data being transmitted and how the data cannot be breached in the cloud where you store it. The major risk you have is when the regulator acquires the aggregated data and reach conclusions in generality, those conclusions might not be the ones that you're actually intended for. And I give you a good example. In the early 60s, the IMO moved from it was trying to move to the probabilistic way of calculating the dynamic stability of the damage stability of ships, and we have three different babies. Data collected in the Soviet Union, data collected in Europe or EEC as we used to call it, and data collected in the United States. None of them really match. It took us 31 years to reach the final product, which is okay, because that one was to improve safety. But now to impose whether ships are still not green, ships are really polluting the air or polluting the environment, then it's a completely different concept. And this is what we have to think. When the regulators acquire this kind of data, where they acquire it from, what is homogeneity is all about, what is veracity is talking about, and on top of that has been massaged. But I think I don't know if that's what you're aiming for, but I don't see any jurisdiction who will claim that my own data doesn't belong to me. And because I gave it to John, the analyst, it became John's ownership. But the aggregation of it and the anonymization of it, it creates a problem, yeah.
And I think that raises an interesting question where when data is developed for a particular reason, let's say it's reporting from a device, and you look at it as that piece of data, it might look very different and it might be interpreted very differently by a third party when it becomes aggregate data. And suddenly that meaning for which it was derived, it's now being used for another purpose. And the way that it was developed and the way that it was reported may not necessarily be appropriate for that other purpose. So it kind of gets into that gray area about not just the veracity of the data, but how it's interpreted and then how it's used. Before we leave, is there another comment, please?
Firstly, I would like to apologize in case my comment is based on my ignorance of the topic coming from the naval marine business. I'm relatively new to the commercial marine business. But talking about ownership of data, unless I'm very much mistaken, all shipping companies have been reporting what previously may have been considered as commercially sensitive data through the MRV process to the EU for a number of years now. Now, how can anyone claim ownership of that data when it's in the public domain? I can access any company, any shipping company's previously perceived commercially sensitive data at the touch of a button. And so does every consultancy on this planet who comes to our offices almost on a daily basis to offer us all this publicly available data that can be used to benchmark our own ship's operations and therefore introduce tailored, that's a good word, tailored efficiencies, which are based on other companies' data. So, I mean, we're entering very perilous waters here. And another comment, I thought the title of the first area was CII, but I didn't hear anything about CII. I mean, what is CII? Carbon Intensity Indicator. I mean, you must all know by now that it has absolutely nothing to do with carbon intensity indicator because it's a way of classifying our ships which may hinder our business. Because this year, well, next year when it's in operation, let's say one of our ships is category C. Without making any changes to that ship, because of the annual reduction, no changes at all, it will become D. What does D mean? We might not get a charter because, you know, there are plenty of other ships in the market that may go for a C. Okay? Now, they'll say, well, that's an incentive for you to make your ship more efficient. Let me tell you, I can make a C and maintain it to C the following year without any changes by simply running longer distances, let's say in ballast condition, at certain speeds which can be pre-calculated, which will maintain my C categorization, whilst at the same time increasing carbon emissions. So I do hope MEPC 76 in July does something about this. And to be honest, I will not blame shipping companies for trying to maintain a certain categorization by what, using a non-politically correct term, CII manipulation. That's all.
No, it's a brilliant point, and this has been a part of the discussions now in many of the conferences and internal discussions with owners that I've been party to, that, you know, do you drive around in circles in order to keep or improve your CII rating and just move the problem around and solve one problem and create another one? I mean, this is the conundrum. And even more than that, what about the really small regional owners? The 2 or 3 ship owners in tramp trades, in regional trades, who will never, ever be able to get out of D, ever, with the ships that they're operating. Are we going to lose those pieces of the puzzle for how we do business as the shipping industry? And if they are at risk, who's going to pick that up? Who's going to move in?
That's a brilliant point you said, brilliant. But I have also one more point, or even a question if you like. We have recently acquired the Kamsarmax bulk carrier, which is Tier 3. She went to Canada, and in Canada you have to, a carrier, you have to operate Tier 3. Consumes about 1 ton more than usual. That means it emits 3.1144 tons of CO2, whereas at the same time reduces the NOx. So, is it my understanding correct that we trade one emission for another? What's the point? I don't know.
And now we're getting into the life cycle assessment talk, right? Because that's exactly why we need to talk well to wake, and we need to talk holistic perspective of emissions on vessels. Because what is happening here, we're moving the burden from CO2 or from NOx to CO2, and we're moving it around. We're not really reducing overall, but we are trying to put measures by focusing on a single piece of the puzzle. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking a little bit about in the next session.
Can I ask the panel if specifically in what you're offering to your customers, if you are enabling CII reporting in the way that you're providing information, do you feel like you have modeled your information so that it kind of plugs in seamlessly into CII reporting?
From our point of view, it's modeling to that, because we can calculate, we measure the CO2 level and can use that in your calculation model instead of using calculation based on different factors and what you have bunkered and so on. I fully agree that CII is not a perfect world. It's a movement, hopefully, towards carbon tax or carbon trading systems, so we actually have a better knowledge of and pricing on how to transport goods. Just a comment to NOx and CO2. That is huge difference in the harmness of the gases between CO2 and NOx. Just to enlighten that. So even that you're using more CO2, the health factor for NOx is much higher than CO2. So yeah, you can cost on the CO2 level, but you remove some harmful NOx gases.
Whereas it complies with all the regulations that was thrown out in their way. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yes.
We have a 7-year-old vessel which is CII category A, and we have a not even a few months old vessel categorized CII B. Doesn't make any sense.
I received a lot of comments from my wife, which doesn't make sense, but I accept it. And I think we will see the same here also, that it's a trend where we have to accept some things. And yes, there are definitely need for improvement. Fully agree.
So I'm going to hand the mic to Andreas again, because having spent the years that he has at IMO, and the one thing we have to understand is we're talking about a political body that's making decisions that may not capture all the practicalities and realities. Good intentions, sometimes unintended consequences.
Don't want to go back to my nightmares. Thank you. I want to answer, just give a brief understanding of what you said about the piecemeal regulation. And I think I was planning, excuse me, I was planning to say that the panel, excuse me, the IMO, or the global regulator, is not like the ICAO, the global regulator for aviation. The aviation industry, good or bad, operates much, created much later than IMO. It has different rules and regulations, but it has one convention. While the IMO works with a number of conventions, and even those conventions, we take the environmental one, which is MARPOL, is not mandatory. You don't ratify the whole book. You can choose, pick and choose. You can be a party to Annex 6, but you cannot be party to Annex 5, for example. And then once they want to create the regulation, they pick up something. So at the end of the day, we end up with piecemeal regulation. You fix the NOxes, you create a problem with CO2. You fix the SOx, you have a problem with something else. For example, if you have a scrubber, nowadays they say, I don't like the discharge water of your open loop scrubber. And that's why I was planning to say that the LCA, the life cycle assessment, would be the industry's reply to something the IMO cannot do. Because this will proliferate unless the IMO manages out of magic, because it's extremely difficult to unify all these under one umbrella, one convention. It will be completely, again, different to match it. It will be, if you try to fix load lines, which has, let's say, 100 parties, and you try to fix solar, which has 200 parties, for example, obviously it's not the same. Now, and that's where the problem comes. When the governments gather together, they might have the best scientists in the world, but they have to protect their own national interests, whether those are manufacturing, or whether those are ship owning, or whether those are maritime clusters interest. So they speak the same language, they want the same thing, but in different ways. So at the end of the day, they have a compromised regulation that creates the anomaly that we just heard from the gentleman before, like a CII, or as you said before, a brand new vessel that just been launched is CII-C, while my old lady that she's been sailing for years, might be A with beautiful colors. How can you fix that? The answer is there. You accept it, and you wait, or you push for review as soon as possible. Because anytime you do review, these mistakes are coming up, and we're all humans. We will see a mistake. Even politics can say, okay, fix it, because otherwise we're going to have a different problem internally. But from my experience, I work in the organization for 30 years nearly. From my experience, the first 5 years are the most complicated ones. What we're facing, John, now is a slightly different problem, though, because we are business to business. We are not directly in fear with the end user. But our actions now are directly to the pocket of the end user, and they might have a say. When we took away the single hull tankers, we never asked the WTO. That was a WTO issue, which it did not affect the end user because it was an industry decision and they went out, that's fine. But when you're actually now taking long-term decisions without any real specificity, why? Because we don't have all the data that we are actually creating so much problems, since we don't examine where the fuel came from. I mean, if we go cradle to grave, you might find that there are a type of fuel that you think today is good, it might not be that good. So let's see, but at the moment we're living interesting times, as the Chinese are saying, that's not a good thing to wish someone. So.
And I think there's an important point there about the review periods. And we have owner associations that sit as NGOs at IMO. So as we're collecting data and we're moving through this process and we start to identify where some of these obstacles and barriers are, it's really important that they're well documented. They're reported into our NGO organizations that do sit at IMO and can influence the process over time. So we're getting very close to the termination time for our panel. We've covered a lot of territory. The one thing that we didn't get to in any meaningful way is the SEEMP. And it's a very big piece of what we're talking about, is having to develop an energy efficiency management plan for each of your ships. That, like I said before, it's all interconnected. None of these things is happening in a vacuum. Is there anybody that would like to comment about either what you've done to develop SEMPs? Do you have them already done for your fleet? How much of a burden was it? Do you think it has interconnectivity that's going to be meaningful both from a regulatory and from an operational standpoint. I'd like to at least touch on the subject if anybody has a comment that they'd like to make about it, or some experience that you've had in developing the plans. Nope? Okay.
Of course, we have developed we have management plans ready. It was also much more difficult than initially thought. The problem is that the improvement technologies, where some of them were technical, let's say, technical modifications, something like this. Others were operational measures. The difficult part is the part of monitoring the operational measures. This proved to be very challenging. I will just say the simplest example that I'm sure everyone has put in his SEEMP, the trim optimization. How do you monitor? This is something that has a huge effect. We have studied our vessels with Delta Marine specifically, that trim optimization has a huge benefit of 3%, but we have seen that masters don't want to use the optimum trim. So this is very challenging to create the procedure to monitor the environmental measure and to force the crew to get the benefit. This is the most challenging thing. In theory, all measures we have taken make our vessels compliant. I'm sure everybody here has done the same. The difficult thing is to come here after 2 years and the theoretical benefits we have all calculated to see them materializing. This is the big challenge.
Thank you. And I think it's really important that we start sharing those challenges, you know, because we're all in this together, right? It's not like that's just you having those experiences. And especially the difference between the technical information and the measurements there and the operational information, which was part of the discussion earlier. So did you want to make a comment before we go? Okay. Anybody else like to say anything regarding SEEMP? Okay. Well, thank you all very, very much. Before I will offer the panel one last opportunity. If there's something that you feel that in the SEEMP world that you're able to contribute to help resolve any of those issues, if there's something, a very quick comment that any of you would like to make. If not, we're going to move on.
Quick comment. We are here to help as much as we possibly can, because I think it's in all stakeholders' interest to work closely together on these matters.
I reckon you speak for most of your colleagues, including the ones next to you. So again, thank you all so much for your participation. I think this was a really useful discussion. We were able to break down some of our own barriers and get into a good dialogue and really challenge in some of the comments what the meaning is and the utility of some of the measures that are being imposed on us. What do they really mean? Are we moving the cheese and trading problems, or where are we really? And I think that's exactly what this is about, to try to uncover some of those things, peel back the onion a little bit, and share information that might help us move the process forward collectively, because we're not going to do it individually. We have to do it through a collaborative spirit and information sharing. So thank you to all of you who contributed to the process of this discussion. Thank you very much to our panelists. If you give them a hand, please. And now we're going to take a quick comfort break.